lounging, son.
Welcome back to the Comic Lounge. I'm Ryan, got my boy Manny back, and we're going to be talking about one of my all-time favorite DC comics, Justice League, the 87 series. So this takes place post-crisis. This is with the merging of all the different Earths. I've wanted to talk about this for a very long time, and I'm so glad that you and I are fucking doing this together, dude.
I'm glad too, man. It gave me a chance to reread it because, this is like one of those titles that I've always. I didn't read it when it was coming out.
Same.
It was. I was a little too young. I mean, although I was probably already picking up comics at like the spinner rack, I certainly wasn't picking up this title. I mean, I remember seeing it, but I was never just attracted to it as a kid. But it's one of those titles that you hear about constantly as a comics fan, and.
Mm-hmm.
I've tried to read it several times throughout my life, and I've had a lot of like start stop moments with it because it just didn't click. But I want to say that like this time, like I really enjoyed it. Like I think this is the first time like I read it for the first time maybe about a decade ago, but this time is when I've really sort of gotten what everybody's been saying, and I think it's just I had to be. I don't know, at a certain point to sort of really appreciate it, but I really sort of finally saw what the hype about the book is about.
Oh yeah, like let me read the credits first off. So it's Keith Giffen and DeMatteis, Kevin Maguire, Terry Austin, Al Gordon. So Keith Giffen does plot and breakdowns, DeMatteis does a script, Kevin Maguire is pencils, Terry Austin, Al Gordon inks. This originally came out in 87, so that's a year I was born. So I definitely was like not around for it, but I still remember. Like, I don't remember the exact day, but I can still remember the way the comic shop looked when the owner, Ed, at the shop that I work at right now, Collector's Paradise, he recommended it to me. So he was constantly steering me, and this is what I've always loved about that shop long before I worked there, was that they would always steer me to some, like, there would be new stuff, but always steering me to, like, old stuff that maybe I wouldn't even think to check out. Like, this lineup, at the age I was, which was probably about, I would say maybe 13 or 14, probably 14. It's not like this screams out to me, at that
That's
age.
what it was. I mean, like as a beginning comics fan, I didn't even recognize half those characters. Obviously, I knew who Batman was. I think
Right.
I obviously knew who Martian Manhunter was, and I probably could have figured out who Captain Marvel was, but everybody else was like, "Who the hell is that?"
Especially because like this version of Black Canary, that's not the Black Canary that I knew. Like I remember like first really falling in love with that character during Mark Waid's JLA year one, when they redid it to where she was a founding member as opposed to Wonder Woman, which I kind of still wish that was the case. I like that, it being Wonder Woman as a founder of JLA instead of and there's no Batman, there's no Superman, stuff like that. But yeah, I didn't know Mr. Miracle. Captain Marvel, not really. Dr. Fate, Blue Beetle, no. Guy Gardner, I was like, who is this Green Lantern? Like when I first saw it. But Martian Manhunter was always a favorite of mine. But picking this book up, I immediately fell in love with it. It's not your typical superhero team book. It is full of jokes. Just the humor in it, the dynamic between the characters. This is a Batman you won't see anywhere else either. Just like
that was one of the things I wanted to talk about, was like the portrayal of Batman is so different from the kind of the current incarnation, I guess, that is permeating popular culture.
Mm-hmm. But even at the time, if you look at I mean, this is 87. So
yeah,
that's when year one comes out.
Yeah, it is year one.
Even
just a couple of years before the movie, and
right. So it's like right there, like with like Dark Knight Returns has just come out, and you're seeing this Batman where he's stoic, but there's like he throws out like little quips every once in a while, but it doesn't, I don't know, like at moments you could say like, oh, that's not really Batman. Like it doesn't feel like Batman, but yet it does at the same time, at least because I've read this book so many times. I mean, I can't even tell you how many times I've read this. But it's interesting, like this team also, because I don't know if you have like this like 4-page intro that they did that I don't know if you saw that.
No.
Well, like it's funny because they talk about the Justice League, the team that's going to be, and like them being excited about doing it, and then realizing they're not going to have like most of the characters that you would associate with Justice League, right? And it started in that Legends crossover miniseries I think that was by John Byrne, if I remember
It was,
correctly.
yeah. That I remember.
Yeah. But like I keep saying, like, this is not most people Justice League, you think of Superman, Batwoman, Wonder Woman off top.
Yeah, like the big
That's what you
seven.
yeah, that's what you're gonna associate. Then you go down Flash, Green Lantern, and then Aquaman. And I guess maybe I hate to say it's interchangeable. Martian Manhunter to me should always be on a Justice League team. I think he is the heart of the team. But I mean that seventh is always interchangeable, I think, kind of, especially now. I think they did, was it Cyborg? Cyborg was in it this time, right? In the last time they rebooted in the
Yeah.
new 52.
Yeah, like the Jeff Johns, like Jim Lee stuff.
Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah, I think that was Cyborg. Cyborg's been part of it like like almost every new incarnation for the past like I guess 15, 20 years has usually had Cyborg in it.
This was my introduction to Kevin Maguire. I don't know if you were aware of him before reading this. No?
No.
That
No, I mean this I've always he's always in my mind he's always been associated with this series. So I mean I
okay.
know he's done other stuff, but when I hear the name, this is where I immediately go.
His art, I think, is what, like, if you put a different artist here, I don't think that it would hit the same. I think like it had to be the perfect marriage of all of these people on this book, because his facial expressions,
I was about to say that, man. It's his
next
facial
level.
expressions are next level, man. Like a lot of the human, a lot of the jokes are hinging upon how well he can get that facial expression to express something, which is something that a lot of comics don't even attempt to do, like to the point where like I feel like, and this is not a dig at anyone, because the comics are drawn differently, but sometimes like, a lot of artists don't draw people all that differently, like but not Kevin Maguire. Like each character, like even whether it's a character you're only gonna see in a couple of panels, like some of the soldiers we see, like the Russian soldiers or whatnot, everyone has a very distinct, very real sort of look to them.
Mhm.
And I guess the acting, quote unquote, for lack of a better term, is very good in this comic. Where like, you have him drawing characters, even when they're talking, in like moments that you don't ever really see them. Like a lot of times in comics, when people are talking, it's almost the same position, like the mouth slightly open, the eyes just sort of looking forward. But not him, man. Like he really draws people like for instance, like look at little. Mine is digital, but like I'll highlight the panel. Like just that one here, like Batman's face, like little things like that, man. Or like look at Guy Gardner's face. It's like
Yeah.
it's really capturing a
Yeah,
moment.
it's like that too. Captain Marvel and Guy Gardner.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff being said with just a facial expression, and that's a Kevin Maguire thing. And like one of the things that I really really loved about when I was rereading this over the weekend, like I couldn't help but like sort of like really go over all the facial expressions and yeah, man, he's great. I think he might be one of the best artists when it comes to drawing like people's facial reactions.
Oh,
One hundred
dude,
percent.
definitely. I mean, I can't. I think he is the best. I don't know many artists that, like, you have this on a page,
Yeah.
and then you have like this, like that little
Hmm.
smirk that he has with, and then I mean every single face. Like if there's multiple characters in a panel, neither one of them has the
Has the
same
same expression.
expression.
No, and the expression like is really carrying or helping to carry whatever like the dialogue is expressing. Like you
Yes.
said, it's such a perfect combination of a creative team from top to bottom. Like it's one of those. I think Ed and Jim were recently talking on an episode about like might have been the recent Swamp Thing #1 episode they were doing where they were talking about like in mainstream comics it's very rare to have like a perfect melding of everyone, like from the inker to the colorist to the art. And this is one of those examples, man. Like it's everyone is bringing their A game and creating like the best possible thing they can together.
Yeah, I mean, I
It's
100% agree. And it's crazy too, because like this book is dated, but it's
yeah,
not, and we'll get into the story why it's dated, but it's not dated in the sense that like the writing is not dated. Like it's just what's going on in the world, because it
It's
definitely
dated historically,
historically, yes.
because it's very much taking place in a very specific time. It's the '80s. There's a lot of references to Ronald Reagan and like the Cold War with Russia that was like wrapping up at the time, and like nuclear disarmament. I mean, some of these things are still kind of contemporary, but like I mean, the whole bit with like the nuclear reactor meltdowns, like that's very 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 much solidifying and taking place in the '80s.
Yeah,
But if you read it within the context of it taking place in the '80s, like none of the other stuff feels dated. Like you said, the dialogue doesn't feel dated, nor does the action, nor does the actual like quality of the writing. That's a testament to like how well it was done. I mean, the dialogue had me laughing out loud, and comics don't really make you laugh out loud all that
yeah.
often. Like, you might have that internal laugh when they're funny, but this one actually made me laugh like when you're watching like a really good sitcom or like a really good just comedy, because it does sort of have a and I mean this like as a compliment, like a sitcom quality vibe in the way that the characters interact. Like
Totally has that vibe. I mean, the comedic timing too, of with the
timing
art and
there,
the
that's another
script,
word. Yeah.
it's very good. Like, and I don't want to forget to say this, but like, I realized that the first time I really even heard or knew about the book in passing reference was probably this panel right here.
Yeah, dude. I mean, that's like an icon.
That
That's become an iconic panel
that's
to a
that's
point.
that was probably my first interaction with this book. Was I probably saw that panel? I think it was probably in an issue of Wizard, and they were
Yeah,
probably doing different scenes from comics or whatever.
yeah. One of the like top best panel more best moments from
Yeah.
yeah, they used to do all those listicles back in the day.
But that just that like, and then he gets punched, and then the reaction from the characters of saying like Mr. Miracle's like, wow, that was efficient. Blue Beetles throws his head back in laughter, saying one punch,
Yeah,
one punch. Then Black Canary's pissed because she wasn't there to watch him get knocked out.
yeah.
Like it's that kind of stuff that like I don't know why we don't see stuff like that now. Like those are the types of moments that make the characters feel a little bit real, a little more real, and instead of just feeling like, you know, superheroes. Like I like I like the marriage of like action with the other stuff, and I think we talked about that with Savage Dragon when we talked about our picks last week.
Yeah.
Like it's the blend of both that make it good, and I think that that's why this book was so well received, and that's why I think it stands the test of time, no matter what. Even though historically, it's definitely rooted in that time period. It's just like
And
I don't
I
know,
gotta say, as much of a hit as it was, I would imagine at the time they were kind of taking a gamble by trying to do a book like
for
this, because
sure.
nothing like this was ever done. You're just coming out of Crisis, which was a huge event for DC that brought a lot of attention to them and sort of reworked their universe. So they basically had a fresh start. To take one of their flagship titles and sort of try something experimental like this is really awesome, and it worked. Like I can't even imagine how this would have been pitched. Like, hey, so we're gonna bring in some of these C-list characters, and wait, it's gonna be really funny, and we're gonna go almost for a sitcom vibe. Like, I mean, I'm imagining here, but I can't imagine that like it wasn't a gamble for them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just even looking at some of the, the notes from the, before the series started, and like just one of this is like they put the only problem with James' writing was that it tended to go on a bit, unlike most comic book dialogue. Cutting a line or two in Justice League is difficult since there's a very distinct pacing and tempo established. It'd be like cutting the fourth bar out of the Star Spangled Banner. The whole tune grinds to a halt, and that's so true. Like none of it, and sometimes I do have that issue with comics that's like, oh my god, there's so much reading, and it's not that I don't like to read. It's like I feel like it
It's a
doesn't need
visual
it.
medium.
Yeah, it doesn't need it. But this book, you never feel that way, and even
No.
as the volumes continue, because I went out on and continued to read the series, not recently, but like over the years, like after this book, and it really is, you can't cut anything from the script, and that is a skill. That is a skill to constantly keep the reader engaged and not feel like they're like, okay, I want to turn the page already. Because I have felt that way in the past with certain comics where it's just like I don't want to look at a wall of text.
No, and like I mean, this book has also highly been very highly influential. Like having read almost all the comics like Kevin Smith has done both in Marvel and DC, I
Hmm.
gotta say, I'm sure this has to be a big influence on the way he wrote those comics because of the dialogue. Like, it has that kind of feel. Like it feels like you're actually listening to people talk.
Yeah, and it's cool because like they threw these creators together, and I don't think it was a high concept book. It wasn't your typical team book,
No,
and the way that the way they all came together, and I don't think anybody knew it was going to be that big of a hit. I mean, let's just go back in time. 1989. Like, I don't think there was a lot of things being collected in trade. This trade that
no.
I have is from 1989. So that just tells you that with only 2 years, they already put it back into press and got it collected. That also has to be of some significance, I would imagine, in terms of what
You
they're.
mentioned these people being put together. Like, I also want to give a shout out to like just how some of these creators were pulling stuff they probably hadn't done before. Like Keith Giffen, I think had already been playing with more humorous stuff. Like I think he did some Ambush Bug and stuff like that
At
by
this
that
point, yeah.
point. So yeah. But DeMatteis, I mean, from what I understand and what I'd read from him before was he was more of a serious writer. I mean, he wrote Craven's Last Hunt, like
Correct.
a lot of his. I used to really love the stuff he did on Spectacular Spider-Man, which was like heavy on the psychological vibe, and he did Moonshadow. So he had more of like a dark sort of writing streak. So for him to sort of jump into a title here that is like heavy on the comedy was probably also another gamble. This must have been an oddball title from the very beginning, and for DC, like you said, to have faith in it and for it to be such a hit that it was collected so shortly after it started being released, just goes to show you like what lightning in a bottle, I guess, if you want to
I like
use that term. This,
I think that's a perfect term for this because I
yeah,
definitely think like the higher ups probably did. There's no way they could have foreseen the success of the
no,
book. They couldn't have foreseen the popularity of the book. I mean, this is the first integration of a Charlton character, which is Blue Beetle. First integration of Captain Marvel, really entrenched in there, right? And then like
yeah,
Fourth World, right? You didn't have, like all
yeah.
that kind of stuff. And Dr. Light was a new character at the time. She didn't exist, I think, prior to the Legends. I think that's where she debuted. Maybe I'm wrong,
I
but
think so too. I know that Legend series that, like you said, does sort of directly dovetail into this.
and I think this is like the first Maxwell Lord as well. So like,
Yeah, yeah.
and he's such like a perfect like douchebag, like you can just see it on his face. And that's what I love about Kevin Maguire's art is that like the writing without his art to depict that really like douchebaggery, I guess. I don't know how to say it, but like you can see it. He's kind of a scumbag and he's manipulate. And I like that that's how this team comes together. He's manipulating them to come together. For what
Yeah.
reason, we don't really know. And even at the end of the trade, like really what are his goals? You still don't really know what his
You
goals
still
are.
don't know. They did a good job of creating like a new mysterious character for the DC universe, and like it was the '80s, so like scumbag businessmen were sort of like
Yeah.
the villain in a lot of things, so it's got that vibe too. But like we said earlier, it's not dating it in the enjoyment. It's just dating is even the wrong word. It's putting it in a specific date period, but not dating it, I guess
Yeah.
is what I would say. Like it's not a dig at all because if you look at it as a period piece, just set in the '80s, and then you're off to the races on it because it's fantastic. I do want to talk about the portrayal of Guy Gardner because it's so like he's such a fucking dick, but he's so much
He,
fun
he
to
is.
to
When
read.
I first read him though, I hated him. Like I really didn't
Yeah,
like him, but I feel like this read, I'm like, I get it. I kind
I
of get
get.
it. I don't know. As I get
He's
older
like a
and
Danny McBride character, like from
yeah,
Eastbound and Down or something. In
yeah,
this, like he says like
yeah,
politically incorrect things, but you can't help but sort of laugh at what he's
yeah.
saying, and you also know that like he may be like a dick, but he's not like a bad person either. It's just his personality. He's very abrasive, and I mean it's great. Like it's shocking to me like what a strange character to make your Green Lantern. Like because like Green Lantern is supposed to be like this sort of like very regal, like like almost like like exuding authority and like like peacekeeping, and then you have this fucking bowl cut headed like asshole. You know what I mean? That like
Yeah.
you're wondering how the hell did he even qualify to get a ring? You know?
I know. I still think that, dude, all the time. Like, because obviously, like, he's not the same Guy Gardner from this book anymore. He still has
Yeah,
touches of it when he's written now, but definitely not the same. But like, even at the time, like Hal Jordan was there,
yeah,
John Stewart was there, and I love I love that they had Hal in the book to be like, what kind of like, what the fuck? Why would you ask him of all Green Lanterns? Like, this is a Green Lantern you want to be the face in the
yeah,
Justice League. He ended up becoming one of my favorite Green Lanterns years after this book obviously was published. You know, during like the way Jeff Johns wrote him, I thought he's a way more interesting character. I think back then the way they wrote him, not just that he was an asshole, but he was also very chauvinistic. And
yeah,
I don't think you could get away with that. Like, there's a few lines, not necessarily from Guy Gardner, but I will say this about the book overall. A few things that were said, I'm like,
yeah.
there's no way that would pass today, you know?
Yeah, it would be problematic, I
Like,
think.
especially
But
the comments about Russia, you know, like
oh yeah,
I just don't think that you could get away with saying that in comics nowadays, which I'm not saying is a good thing that you can get away with it, because I feel like you're kind of threading the line a little bit if you do that in comics, but it's almost like kind of like they censor a little too much. I feel like at DC and Marvel,
yeah.
they're almost a little too careful. Like, I feel like this is just under the offensive bar of being too much. You know, I feel like they just get it right there, and then they kind of pull back.
That's why I used the Danny McBride
Yeah.
analogy earlier. You know, and like that's kind of like the vibe I get, where like he's or like Jay from James Silent Bob, like he just says these wrong things. You know what I mean? But it's like it's still playful enough that it's like if you're getting offended by what he's saying, you're taking the whole thing way too seriously. You know?
Right,
And
right, right. Yeah, you have to take it with a grain of salt, because you have to realize the words that are coming out and who they're coming out of. You know what I mean? Like, you're like, all right, well, he's an idiot.
yeah,
He doesn't know any better. So like, you kind of just like give it a pass, you know? But
well, he's
just
like a Dwight from The Office. Like he's like the one character that like that should have is definitely a dick, but he's such a blast to read, and I'm sure he was a blast to write because
oh hell
characters
yeah.
like that must be a lot of fun.
And that was the
And
thing. Okay.
and he's very necessary for the story to work because without Guy Gardner in this story, like a lot of the humor is not going to fall into place.
Oh, definitely not. I mean, the banter between him and Batman, where he constantly goes against, but then Batman puts him in his place. I mean, both verbally and then by knocking him out with one punch.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, I think, and then the dynamic, each character on the team has such different personalities. Like, none of them fit a specific mold of like what you would
no,
think you would need for the superhero. Like Mr. Miracle was kind of out of left field. He was probably I mean, he has become one of my more favorite DC characters, but like I don't think I didn't read Fourth World yet at this point either. So I think the only knowledge I had of his character was from, I think I had an issue from the 90s series that came out, or maybe it was like the late 80s. I can't
yeah, I
remember.
remember that Mr. Miracle series because I had a few random issues that I would buy at a spinner rack, and they didn't make a whole lot of sense because I read
Yeah.
them so out of order. But visually, I knew who he was, and I always
Mhm.
thought he looked very cool. And
Yeah.
I also love just the way that that Kevin Maguire like just draws the characters, like the costumes. I mean, they're very much a product of their time, but like they're everything is so like precisely drawn and clean, and the action scenes have the appropriate level of like movement, and then there's awesome little like I love this page, like we see a lot of TV screen pages in comics, but like there's just something a bit about this one I think that stands out. Maybe it's just the use of white instead of black in the background for the screens, and just juxtaposing it with like the regular panel. But like it's just that it's this was I think probably after Frank Miller started popularizing this sort of gimmick in Dark Knight Returns, a lot of people started doing it because it works very well. But for some reason, this one just stands out. Maybe it's just the moments he's capturing and the way it's laid out. But like that kind of stuff is it's very inventive, and
Hmm.
they're playing with a lot of the form of comics in the title too, which is something I realized. Pacing, like you said, timing. In a lot of ways, for being a mainstream title, their run is extremely experimental, man. Like it's
Exactly.
this.
Yeah, I mean, like you said already, like put yourself in that time period. What else is
Yeah,
really doing it? And you said Frank Miller, but really, I think that even preceded Frank Miller with Howard Chaykin on American Flag. He was
you're
doing
right.
it,
You're right. Yeah, you're
you
right.
know?
And you know what? Now that you mention it, there is a lot of Howard Chaykin American Flag in this book
Yeah.
influence. Like obviously, like Guy Gardner has that kind of vibe to it. Like the sort of like try at the time, doing a story set in Russia and dealing with nuclear disarmament was probably pretty political move too to be discussing that in a humor title. So again, experimental theme. Like I think the word I kept going back to was that when I was rereading on this was like, or the concept was like how experimental and how many risks they were taking by putting this title out and making it such a big deal.
Yeah,
Like
I mean,
I don't know if DC or Marvel would, like you said, would do something like this these days. Like try to make such a try to take one of their flagships and try to make it so different.
I wish they could look to the past to see what worked before
Right.
and try
I
to do
don't
some of
want
that
this
now.
again, but I want this approach again, where it's like let's come up with a fresh take
Yeah, I want this kind
on
of
the
risk
concept.
being taken
Yeah.
and not being thrown into Black Label. Like I'd like to see them take more risks in the mainstream line instead of just for a lack of I don't know how else to say it, but they kind of played safe. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like for the most part,
And this
DC
was
and
not a
Marvel.
safe move. This was a risky move on their part. Like yeah, they were coming off a high of Crisis, but at that point, all eyes are on DC. Like they've just revamped their entire line. So then they're like, well, let's bring back the Justice League, but let's make it funny. Like I mean, that wouldn't fly today, and it's very admirable, and they made it work. I mean, this is a classic series. I mean, most people of our generation that are creators now usually cite this as one of their bigger influences. And especially like the writers that are heavy into dialogue. Like if you're a heavy dialogue writer in comics, this must have been a title that you paid attention to because like
Yeah,
there
like
there
Bendis
was
had to have
no
been reading this.
yeah, there was no dialogue like this in comics before. Like at least that I'm aware of. Like you said, maybe in American Flag there was a little bit of that humor, but in
Yeah.
a mainstream title, when you're having Batman in the book, like like your biggest selling superhero in there, no, like this. It's a very cool title, and if all you've ever done is just hear about it as a comics fan, and you're afraid that because you've been exposed to so many iterations of the league now, you don't want to go back and read it because you feel it might be dated or whatever, don't, because you're missing out on a one of the most important parts of comic history, and b just a fucking great title, that you're
Oh
gonna
yeah.
love.
Yeah, it's one of the most unique superhero team books ever published, especially from the big two. And you know what else there's a couple other things that I want to mention that we don't see. The thought bubbles.
Yes,
Them
I
them
love Thought
thinking
Balloon.
them thinking in their head, like the thoughts that are going on, not the stuff they actually say out loud. It's like we don't see any of that. There is none of that in comics. I don't
No,
know
that
why
that's a
that went
narrative
away.
thing. Yeah, I think about that every now and then because like the Thought Balloon is like one of my favorite like narrative techniques in comics. And you're right, we don't see a lot of it now. It's kind of been replaced by the internal like narrative box, which I guess sort of saves the same purpose, but there's just something about the thought balloon when it's mixed with like what the characters are saying that sort of gives you narratively like a different look into the character and can kind of enrich them or enrich the moment, or in a lot of cases make the moment even funnier because they're thinking something and saying something else and it's juxtaposed. Like, and it's not used here like it used to be in a lot of old comics where it's like just to sort of do a narrative info dump. Like that's not why the thought balloons are used here. Like they're used to sort of like tweak whatever the characters are saying or whatever's going on at the time. And uh and I don't know if anyone's ever used thought balloons the same this way either in other titles. It's the way that it's used here is very unique.
Yeah, I mean, there's panels where there is no actual dialogue being spoken. It's just like I'm looking at a page of Booster Gold, and it's literally 3 panels in a row of his internal dialogue being said,
Yeah,
and it's happening in the middle of a fight, like, and it's just like, and then there's moments where, like, the page I was talking about with Black Canary, where she comes into the room after Guy Gardner gets hit, she says something, right? But then at the same time, there's another thought balloon to the right of that, and it's what she's thinking in her head. And
yeah,
I think that is definitely something I really miss in comics, because like there's room for a lot of humor also in that technique. And the other thing I wanted to say too is like the way the team comes together, like Maxwell Lord kind of gives the communicator to Dr. Light. So she was never a jailer before. So she's on the team. He kind of forces that to happen. Same with Booster Gold. And this is what starts the buddy friendship of Blue Beetle and Booster Gold, which is one of my favorite dynamics in comics. You know, it's
blue and gold, baby. You know,
yeah,
like it's a term for a reason. And
yep,
you're right. I mean, the characters hadn't even really met before this, or they definitely weren't like a duo like they are now. To the point where, like, you know, you mention one and the other one is immediately thought of. Like they're interconnected
yeah.
and almost come as a package deal now. You know, you can't really have one without the other.
Yeah, I think that
So that's another great thing that the series introduced.
yeah.
I was gonna say we mentioned like Kevin Maguire's ability to draw facial expressions, but like he's also kick ass at drawing action scenes. Because don't think this is just a comic of people sitting around and talking. There's some really very cool action scenes that have a lot of movement. Like the whole issue with the Royal Flush gang attacking, like that has some really great moments of action in it,
Yeah.
and you know, some really good pacing. The pacing in this book is great, whether it's like the humor or the action. It's never boring, and the action never overstays its welcome or feels too long. Because I mean, yeah, comics are also a visual medium, but like sometimes it can get a slog if all you're seeing is page after page of just fighting. Either like they know when to bring in like the typical comic book elements and when to bring in like the experimental elements just to make it work. Again, it's just top notch from top to bottom, man. And like
I know.
it's
To me, it's a flawless comic.
yeah, it is.
I've written. I think that's a true testament too. Is when you can read a book so many times over the years, right? And you still get enjoyment out of it every single time. Every single time I've read this book, I always leave being like, I want to continue reading the book. I want to continue reading the series, but like, I obviously like I always constantly buy new stuff, so like I can't really always jump into a series that's like I think there's like 8 trades, maybe I'm wrong. Um,
Yeah,
but it is such a great book, and you know, like where you leave off is very different than from where you start with this book. Like the team that you see on this cover is not the team you end up with at all. Like you notice there's no Booster Gold on this cover. You know, by the
yeah,
end, you don't have Dr. Light on the team, you don't have Dr. Fate on the team. And Dr. Fate's not even really in the book that much, to be honest with you. There's an arc that takes place, I think, in like it starts in issue 4, 5, and 6, I believe, with the Gray Man. Um,
yeah,
which I really like. And you have the Creeper. Like that's another like kind of like deep cut, you know, like that Creeper is
yeah.
not exactly a big character, but like you throw him in the mix, and you know, I like that. I didn't really know that much about the Creeper either when I first read this book, you know, like
Me neither. I knew he was a Dicto character, but
yeah. So I just think like where you start with this book and where you end up, and at the end, like issue 7 isn't even called Justice League anymore. It changes the title to Justice League International, which is another really interesting concept, you know, like where this series continues to go post this book, where they have like different UN offices, you know, like they're a part of the UN. So they're no longer centralized to they're not Justice League of America anymore. They're not Justice League. And how they kind of like get teammates now, like Captain Atom gets thrown into the mix from the US
yeah,
government, and then Rocket Red from the Russian government. So that's how you
yeah. I
appease
was
both
just
of
looking
those.
at like this cover,
Yeah.
which you know, another thing is what iconic covers these series had. I mean, everyone is always talking about the cover for the first issue, but I'm pretty sure this cover has been like homaged a bunch of times too. You know, like
How
it
about this one, dude? Like that's a fucking now that's a
dude.
cover right there, dude.
I was just looking at that one too. Like every cover has been fantastic. Also, like and not typical of your comics cover. And they don't even make covers like this in comics anymore. Like so many times now, the cover of the book has nothing to do with whatever's going on in the story.
I feel like we
And
talked
I
about that not that long ago too, didn't we? Yeah.
maybe when we were talking about man, maybe not on recording, but I know we probably talked about it because like like the '90s version of the Flash without the Brian Baldwin covers. Like the covers almost serve as a trailer or like a part of the story, which is I think something that they did a lot in the Silver Age. Where like they would have even like I
Dialogue
don't know. Yeah,
sometimes on the
exactly.
cover.
Yeah, you have word balloons on the cover, which I'm not sure if this series has it,
Yeah, I
but
don't think so.
definitely, but definitely the covers to this series.
Well,
No,
actually,
yeah, they're
yeah,
very
number one, want to make something
yeah.
of it.
That was
Like,
about to say, yeah, exactly. So, and like that could easily be just a panel in the story, but it's such a fantastic, striking cover. Like they really knew how to grab readers from the beginning, and you could tell that a lot of thought and planning went into this series. And there must have been an insane amount of very careful communication between the creative team, because you don't get this level of execution with so many people involved without having like very good, clear communication where everybody's on the same page and try to achieve the same goals with the title, because it just works, man. And like you said, it's a flawless comic book, and how often can you say that about something like that? And like, DC was very fertile at the time when you think about it. I mean, the Dark Knight Returns, like Year One, all these things are coming out. So many different things that are popping in different ways, and then like they're able to do something like this.
mhm.
That like, I mean, here we are, like what, like 30 years later almost, and you and I are still talking about it, and
Yeah.
it still feels like fresh to the point where like we're lamenting that we wish DC was doing stuff like this still, like that alone is a testament to how good it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear, like, and that's what I love about like Michel Fife is he's constantly talking about this particular era of DC,
Yeah,
which kind of like always makes me like I always used to be like, I'm not gonna give me like Bronze Age stuff, and now I'm like, fuck, like after I read this, I'm like, I do kind of want to go get some like '80s stuff now from DC because there was a lot of good stuff. I mean, Matt Wagner did a Demon miniseries. Um,
yeah,
I
I
have,
have a couple of those.
yeah, I actually have it. I just haven't read it yet. And then there's a Doctor Fate miniseries that I think I forgot who did it. I'm name's escaping me, but like there is a lot of great stuff. Suicide Squad
Uh,
by John Ostrander was from this period
That's
too.
right. I mean, yeah, and that's when, I mean, Vertigo wasn't a thing yet, but that's when Vertigo's seeds were starting. Like when
Yeah.
they started going in that direction with some of those books. So it just seems like overall that experimental feeling that DC had was sort of being caught by each of these books, and for them to throw that kind of attitude into their flagship mainstream title, it's great, man. I mean, I love it, and I had so much fun reading it over the past couple of days. Like, I'd always liked it, but this time it really, really connected. Like, I mean, I was so happy when you mentioned us talking about this, because I was like, man, I've been wanting to reread that for years, and I think now I'm in the right frame of mind to sort of really appreciate it.
Yeah, I have
Because it
had this.
definitely wasn't something that as a kid I think I would have gotten. The humor probably would have gotten over my head.
Yeah, I definitely didn't get all of the humor when I read it. I mean, I was a teenager, but I remember like, wow, man, I was so shocked that I liked the book as much as I did because it was an older comic and I didn't always connect with some of the older stuff. And it wasn't that old back then, but it was still at least like, I don't know, like 15 years old, 14, 15 years old. But it's such a great book. And, I had that book. Sometimes I'll set stuff aside that I want to talk about on the channel, whether it's talking about it with someone or it's, I mean, I haven't done them in a long time, but when I used to do the overhead, flip through with the books.
Yeah,
So it's been sitting on a shelf, waiting to be talked about. And I was like, I was putting some trades away and I saw it. And then I think I messaged you right afterwards. I think I sent you the cover to number one. And I was like,
yeah.
you want to talk about it? And I was stoked that you were down to talk about it. I figured you would be. And, if yeah, I mean, I can't give any more praise to this book. I love it. It's amazing. If you haven't read it, I mean, you read it on Comixology, so it's available digitally. I know that they did an
Yeah,
omnibus not
yeah,
that
they did.
long ago. I don't know if that's still in print. I know sometimes those bigger collections will go out of print, but if you can find this book, however you
It's
can,
usually easily available and easily to order. I mean, it's one of the evergreen titles I think at this point, so
yeah.
you should be able to find it pretty easily. And the only thing I haven't read was the follow up they sort of did. I mean, I want to say a few years ago, but it's been longer. Like the formerly known as the Justice League. I never read that one,
Oh
but I
yeah,
want to
I
go.
I have I have them somewhere. They did an arc in JLA Classified. I don't know if you remember that series where they had like
Yeah, I do.
I know they
Yeah,
did, it was the second arc. So Grant Morrison did one with Ed McGuinness. That was the first three issues. And then I think it was like 4, 5, 6 was this creative team. And then they did do the formerly known as the Justice League. They did a 6-issue miniseries. I haven't read all of that. I think I have. I think I might be missing a couple issues, but I mean, that just shows you that like there's always been a fandom for this team, and like the characters that come into the team, Fire, Ice, like the characters more associated with this era, like the characters on the cover are not the ones normally that most people associate with this team. It is the Blue Beetle, the Booster Gold, the Fire, the Ice, Green Lantern, Guy Gardner. You know, it is that core team that eventually people start to associate with them. And that's why when New 52 relaunched, you had Justice League International, you know, and then you did have, I think when Brightest Day was going on, they had that JLI book also, right? Like after Maxwell Lord came back from the, you know, White Lantern rings and stuff like that. So yeah, this just such a great series. I mean, I could talk endless on this, and it continues to be a good book. But that's all I got. I just can't recommend this book enough. Can't give it.
No, me neither. And it's you're gonna read it fast, and it almost begs to be written in a couple of sittings, because like it's so tightly written, and it's like it's such a good setup that it flies by while you're reading. You know, a lot of older comics, like again, the dating sort of like can make parts of it a slog, but I enjoyed every aspect of it, and like it doesn't even feel like a 30-plus-year-old comic book. You know, it's if you look at it like being, you know, a period piece, then you know this thing could have been written just, you know, very recently. It still feels fresh. It's crazy that a 30-year-old title like can feel so experimental. You know, like I guess it's very telling of a lot of the projects that are being done in the mainstream now. You know, again, not to say that I don't like mainstream comics. If you guys watch our weekly picks, we both read plenty of weekly books from the big two. You know, it's just nice that there was this in addition to that. You know, and like comics are a medium, not a genre. So like I would love to see all sorts of genres with it, and you know, to have sort of a comedic superhero story, like you don't see it often enough. And you know, it would work. I mean, the MCU movies have almost this kind of vibe to them in a weird way, where like a lot of the characters bicker, and there's a lot of jokes being thrown out. So like, why not actually make the comics like that also?
Dude, I totally agree with that. Yeah, I mean, there's room for this type of superhero book to be on the sands in the main line. You know, it doesn't have to be separate or its own thing. You know,
no. And you know, there's definitely a lot that can be learned, I think, from many writers in how to write team books with this title, like where the dynamic is unique enough that you sort of want to keep reading about the team, but you know, they don't all always agree. It's just you could tell that they gave a lot of thought to each character. Like this is a very well written team book. So again, if you like team books, you're gonna love this, because you don't see this kind of interplay amongst characters either. Like it feels like every character, it really is thought out.
Definitely. Well, like I said, go pick up the book, and you won't regret it. And
you won't regret it, man. It's a classic for a reason. And if you're a comics fan, you definitely want to have that as, you know, something you've read.
Definitely. And that's all we got today. If you're not following us, make sure you hit those links down below. Hit that subscribe button so you can be alerted every time a new video drops. And on that note, we're out.
We'll see you next time.